It's funny. It says my name is Wells.
Yeah.
Oh, Wells. Yeah. I don't even know if there are Wells. I don't think there is one. I think that's been hacked, which will actually be a good example for our hearing. Okay, you tell me when we're live.
Session's actually going to start.
Okay, 3, 2. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call our hearing of the Utah School Security Task Force to order. Thank you for your patience today. It looks like we do have a quorum between our, online presence, I'm told, and those who are here in person. Thank you for being here. We do need to approve our minutes of our December 19th meeting and recognize and thank you for being the only legislative hearing that week, the week before Christmas. Well done. I have a motion there. Is that Dr. Voorhees or Joe?
I was just going to make the motion to approve.
Thank you. That's in order. Any comment to that? Hey, seeing none, would you like to sum, Joe? Just teasing. All right. All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes of December 19th, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, they are approved. We're going to go ahead and go into our favorite part of this, which is what we've been waiting for the last year, really, on our school safety needs assessments. This is back to the requirement originally in House Bill 61 and now in House Bill 84 this past year that required our LEAs, our local education agencies, and our LEAs, our local law enforcement agencies. Okay, got you both in there. To work together on our school safety needs assessments. These, I want to help everybody to understand who's watching, who may not be familiar. This is what tells us what we need to work on. This is what tells us what we need to prioritize. This is what helps us to understand where the greatest needs are that need to immediately be addressed. And so they're long awaited, and we're happy to be able to report that we have some information on, at least some initial information on those today. I'm going to turn the time over to Micah on what that looks like right now, and then we'll turn time over to Chantel and Willie, both from the School Safety Center at USB. Helps if I turn on your microphone. I think you should be good, though.
I'm good, yeah. Let's try this again with screen sharing.
I guess I should announce that Senator Owens is excused. He's on a plane somewhere.
All right. Good afternoon, Task Force. My name is Micah Wixon with Legislative Research and General Counsel. I'm going to give you just a quick overview of, really a reminder of the appropriations that the Task Force has oversight of or is involved in. Before I get too far into that, though, I thought it would be helpful to do just a quick reminder about the legislation that's been passed around school security and school safety and security over the past few years. So as a reminder, in 2003, the legislature passed HB 61. And this bill included, among many other things, there was an appropriation of $72 million. So it set up a grant program of $72 million that was available for local education agencies. And really the idea was to provide funding for school districts and charter schools to really kind of beef up some basic security measures. So this is a quick reminder about what some of the kind of the most common things that school districts and charter schools use those funds for. So as far as the process, State Board of Education staff rolled out this grant application process in 2023 and began awarding these school safety and support grants in 2023 and early 2024. And school districts do have until the end of 2026 to spend down these grant dollars. And I understand there are a couple of extensions in the process because of a few different things, but for the most part, they have until the end of 2026 to spend down those dollars. And then, of course, last year, here we go. The legislature passed HB 84, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this bill, but just as a reminder, a couple of things that are worth pointing out that this bill did. It did require, we've talked about this a lot here, but it did require every school to conduct a school safety needs assessment by the end of the year. And we're going to hear more about the results of those from Chantel next. And then it did appropriate about $100 million for school security grants. One other thing worth mentioning is it also established a grant subcommittee of this task force. So that means it's several members of the task force who participate in reviewing some of the grants, kind of high level of what school districts are requesting. And then they'll help with some of the distribution process. So anyway, just wanted to mention that that grant subcommittee does exist and has been meeting. So on to the appropriations. So as I said, the legislature appropriated about 100 million, not quite, for school safety grants. And these are in two buckets. The funding's in two buckets. First is the general grants. That was $50 million. The task force, in coordination with the state security chief and the school safety center, is responsible for prioritizing grants out of this $50 million bucket. And the idea is behind this is that the task force can procure items that would be needed sort of across the state. So, for example, back in July, the task force, you may remember, approved starting procurement process for guardian identifiers. So those are the identifiers that guardians will have so that they can be identified by law enforcement in an emergency. So that's one thing that the task force has done already with this $50 million. The $48 million, those are in targeted grants, and that is the money that goes to a school district or charter school specific needs. And those grants are informed by the results of the needs assessment that we're due at the end of the year. So again, Chantel is going to be talking to us more about what we're finding from the needs assessments as far as what schools are requesting. And one of the things that the task force can do is if we're finding that most schools need certain items or certain services, that's something that the task force could fund as a general grant out of the $50 million pot, rather than a specific need for a specific charter school or a school district out of the $48 million pot, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to review that with the task force before we get into this next part. Are there any questions that I can answer, Chair?
I don't see any. Although, let's see. Yeah, keep going.
Okay, well that's what I had. Yep, okay. That completes my presentation. So
all right, I did fail to recognize Dr. Voorhees here. As many of you may or may not know, that we didn't lose Dr. Norman. She's fine. She's great. Okay, she's fine. She had a great retirement party a bit ago, but she did leave that position, and now we have Dr. Leah Voorhees with us on her place on the task force. So I appreciate you being here, and I should have started off with that. So sorry. You're welcome. Good to have you here. Okay. We'll now turn the time over, technically to her employee, Chantel. So good thing I started with that one. Let's see.
I don't think, I am on. Thank you.
Yep.
Chantel Cota, Director of School Safety and Student Services with the Utah State Board of Education. Pleased to be here today with a short presentation on school safety updates. As Representative Wilcox mentioned, we'll be talking about the school safety needs assessment and also have some updates on the school safety dashboard that I'd like to share with all of you. But before we get into anything, I want to celebrate our 100% status. So we had 100% of our schools across the state of Utah submit their school safety needs assessment. And I think we just all need to pause and really celebrate the fact that our schools are so invested in school safety and taking the time to do their due diligence to recognize any gaps. I don't know, and Dr. Voorhees or Member Carey, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that we've ever had 100% in the history of anything we've ever put out there. So I just want to thank all of you for your tremendous support. My team, I just really want to thank the School Safety Center team. We fielded a lot of calls and were there for support. And also I had others out in the field who helped make calls and really just make sure that the importance was elevated and also that schools felt supported. So just want to thank everyone and take a moment to celebrate our 100% submission rate.
Thank you. I did brag about that to the KUTV, to Mr. Malahy before. So just for the record, he knows.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's get some good news out there. I love it. Before I jump into the school safety needs assessment, I just want to remind everyone of our House Bill 84 minimum safety requirements. So within House Bill 84, there are several requirements that schools have to be mindful of. One includes limited entry points, video surveillance, ground level windows, protected by security film or ballistic windows, internal classroom door locks, bleed kits and first aid kits, exterior cameras on entrances, fencing around playgrounds, and panic alert devices. So keep that in mind as I go over just some high level data on the needs assessment report. The primary talking point that I have for you today includes the number of standards. So those standards that I just referenced are here on table 7. And here this gives you an idea of the number of schools across the state. This is a count of all schools. So when I say that, that includes district schools and charter schools that have in place 1 or 9 standards. So the goal is to have 9 standards in place for full compliance with safety. But I think it's important here that we look at the number of standards that are being implemented or in place. You can see here we have a pretty standard bell curve, meaning that many of our schools are within kind of that mid-range of having 4 to 5 standards. And then we do have a very small population that does have all 9 standards in place. And then we have a higher population on some of the other areas as well. So again, this is important to just kind of see at a glance where our schools are and what they have in place. Some of the data that we learned from the needs assessment, some of the areas that we've decided to focus on with the grant subcommittee includes what are the low-hanging fruit? What are the things that we can support schools with in terms of grant funding immediately? And some of the areas we've identified include the bleed kits and the first aid kits. So we know that about half the state has either a bleed kit or a first aid kit in their classroom. And so we're looking at how can we support 100% there. Another thing that we're looking at, of course, are those panic alert buttons and looking at the percentage that we have across the state and what we can do to support 100% implementation. A lot of schools have come to me and asked, well, what do I do first and how do I move forward? And the advice that we've given to them is look at your needs assessment, look at that low-hanging fruit, make some decisions with your multidisciplinary team around what are items that you can purchase now, either with grant funding or existing funding that you know will make your school the most safe and secure for your staff and students. And I'll stop there for questions before I move on to the school safety dashboard updates. Okay.
No. There's got to be questions. Okay, I see some there. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep.
Yeah, Director Coda, first of all, congratulations. I know you and your team worked hard on getting to that 100% level, so thank you for that. I know it just didn't come, and the schools and LEAs wanted to get it right. And congratulations to you and to those districts for doing that. My question is, as I'm looking at this school safety needs assessment data set, it appears that about 55% of our schools have implemented 5 or more of these safety standards or in the process of implementing them. Is there a factor, or how are these schools so far ahead of where some of their contemporaries? Does that make sense? Is there a factor we can look at to help us determine why these schools are, I don't like using the term so far ahead, but ahead of their peers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a great question. We have not drilled down and we didn't ask questions on this needs assessment to get to that level of data, but I do appreciate the question. And that is part of our next plan, is to drill deeper into what are those factors that are supporting schools? What are still some of the gaps? I can certainly tell you some of the gaps that have been reported to us. And one includes funding. The other includes just maybe not having the technology, or the building just, may be an interesting shape or type of building. So those are some of the areas that I can report to you. And certainly when we have data on factors for success, I will report that out.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's a good question. Board Member Carey, I think that's your official title over there, right? Board Member. We need to come up with something cooler. Like
Legislature controls that. So
well, just let me know. We might slip it into the bill. Think about it. Okay. But the part that and this is frankly a question I just got asked by the media here right before, and why are some districts ahead of where others are?
Yes.
And the real reason is because there was a different priority in different areas of the state. The first answer when we first did the first informal assessment after the Uvalde disaster, right, down at DPS was, how safe a kid is depends on where they happen to go to school, on how seriously the principal's taking it there, how seriously the administrators at the district are taking it there. Was that even in the factor with what they decided to prioritize? And so we just have a wide range. And so a lot of them, are starting on second base. They just because of where they're at or what they've had to deal with. We have one of our districts that already has its own police department. They're in a different place than a lot of, especially in our rural communities. So there's that. A lot of them started in different places. And then there's been intentional investment by some in charge of those schools to make sure. If you were to go to Utah Military Academy, you're going to find it drastically different than any number of charter schools throughout the state. Different response. You kind of expect at something called a Utah Military Academy, right? Okay. So the good news is that's all bumped up. We are far better off than we were when we started. So then when we started the School Safety Center, when we started Safe UT, all of those things. So there's a lot of good stuff here. But yeah, we can see we're about in the middle of almost getting there on some of them. Congratulations to those who are already meeting the 9 standards. That's kind of awesome. And those guys should, I don't know what if the task force needs to come up with some kind of a how awesome you are award. Yeah, something better than board member, but anyway, whatever that is, I think we should figure out a way to celebrate those while we're encouraging others, because that's pretty impressive at this point. So I'm thrilled to see that there are not only are some, but we've got 31 that are rock star in it. So recognize that. Any other questions or comments from the committee on the data? Okay, back to you, Chantel.
Thank you so much. The next update I have for you is on the school safety dashboard. In House Bill 84, USBE is tasked with creating a school safety dashboard that is to be included within our parent portal. And just a couple of reminders of the features that the dashboard is supposed to have. It will have a comparison tool created under Utah Code Section 53G6-805. And some of the data that will be described in the dashboard includes school disciplinary actions, minors found in possession of a dangerous weapon, and law enforcement action. And so we've been working really diligently on this with the School Safety Center in conjunction with the Utah State Board of Education. As a reminder, the Utah State Board of Education did vote to move $1.5 million of discretionary funding towards this school safety dashboard. So that's given us an opportunity to listen to presentations and to learn more about what our options could be for utilizing the right technology for that. And consequently, I've moved some of that information over into the grant subcommittee so that they have the same information around just some of the pathways that we can take to best create the dashboard in the way that you envision it, Representative Wilcox.
Thank you.
And with that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. So we took a shot at a federal grant. That didn't work out. Admittedly, we had like a 2-minute notice to take the shot, but we did take the shot there. I appreciate the state school board stepping up and prioritizing that. We know that 1.5 isn't going to get us there. What I'm going to propose next is that we use some of that above the line funding to finish the job. So I'd like to make a motion that we, as a task force, approve the other half, $1.5 million in matching funds from the general grants appropriations in HB 84 to the State Board of Education to develop the completion of this school security dashboard. And so I'm happy to take any questions or have any comment on that. We would have ended up spending $1 million to finish the job if we'd have got the $2 million grant, but that didn't happen and it still needs to be done. Any questions or comments from the committee or the task force? Joe, are you? Sorry, keep going.
No questions. Just wanted to express the appreciation of the Utah State Board of Education for that motion for that application. One of the things the board looked at when we voted to allocate the $1.5 million was we wanted to lead by example for the state. We didn't want to sit there and say, we don't have the allocated money. What do we do? We wanted to prioritize it and set that example. And I believe I speak on behalf of the board when I say thank you for the motion so we can finish this project.
Yeah, thank you. I talk a little bit about cultural change a lot, and that's really what a lot of this is, right? Like we're in a different world than we were in the schools we all grew up in, and I appreciate the recognition there and the importance of making it a priority. I also need to recognize the Safe Schools for Alex, who's been working with us, and our friends in the volunteer space who've been focused on this, particularly Max Schachter, recognition of his son who started that organization. Having information like this available, not just to policymakers, but to parents, protects everybody, helps us all to make sure that we don't drop the ball on the most important things. So I really appreciate that. I don't see any further lights. Do you have anybody online? Okay. Go ahead and place the motion then. All those in favor of approving the motion to approve the 1.5 million from the above the line funds, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. I'll go ahead and go to Senator Milner.
So looking at the needs assessment that we have, I think it's appropriate for us to appropriate some money to be able to meet some of the basic needs that schools have. So I would move that the school security task force use funds from the general grant appropriation to supply first aid kits and bleed kits to the state's public schools, and request that the State Board of Education and the state security chief start the procurement process for those items. So that's a pretty basic need that needs to be met across all of our schools, and we should begin the process for that.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the task force? All right. I got one there, Chief Pennington.
Yeah, thank you for the motion. I think that certainly is a low-hanging fruit and a need. Just a question. When we talk about at least the trauma kits, or the bleed kits, there is some specific specialized training that goes along with that. A lot of times the EMS in that area can provide that. However, there's going to be certain circumstances where maybe they can't. I guess I would ask if that motion would consider them also accessing funds for training, or if that would be in their grant application that the USB side controls.
Just a second. Is this equipment?
So the way it's written is just
So we can amend the motion is the short answer. There are, and perhaps there's a couple of amendments that we could include with the motion. Chairs have been in discussion or in conversations with a lot of people, but with school nurses, for example, about this exact issue. We know that we're going to have to leverage all of our resources to pull this off. They're going to have to be a part of that conversation as trained professionals that are in the schools. So the initial motion was limited to just what it's going to take to acquire, the actual products, so we can take that off the table for as many of the districts as we can. I don't know. What do you think, Micah? What would we need to do to amend that?
The question we have is
potentially include training.
Is the original funding source that's only for capital? Okay. All right. So we can amend it. Okay.
Yeah. And then when we do that, the other part to this, hang on just a second. The other part to this that we've been talking about that could be, we're going to do that later. The other part to this that's related to the bleed kits is to include in there some kind of a mention about whether or not it's appropriate to split the costing model. So if there's a private organization that is willing to help, which the current bill contemplates, if there's, the school district itself is already contracted or already has a certain number of those, if we can allow for reimbursement, that kind of stuff. So I think what we would probably like to just say with this one is to make sure we are exploring and then reporting back on to the grant subcommittee what those most cost effective models are. So before we spend the money. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Okay,
Makes
I like
perfect
that.
sense.
Okay.
But
do
you
that.
want them to come back before they actually procure them.
Not necessarily, no. I want them to have the authority to do it.
But you just said bring it back.
Just report back.
Report back.
And I did say before, but I was wrong. So
All right.
okay, she's gonna fix my motion. Just don't worry about us.
We're
Here we go.
we're going to keep the motion as the original motion so that you're able to go out and procure these. We would like to have a report back, but you don't have to report back before you actually spend the money. So the piece of this, though, I think it's important is once you procure and kind of spend more time working with the schools on procurement, we are open to entertaining something, a follow-up funding for training, but want to give you an opportunity to really figure out how we might go about that and what the general cost is of that. Okay.
Okay.
So this motion just says, let's fund the bleed kits and the first aid kits and begin the procurement process. Ask you to come back and make a report to this committee.
Perfect. Okay, that's been well stated. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Eventually, I'll call you the task force like I'm supposed to every time. Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and place the motion. All those in favor of purchasing the bleed kits and first aid kits, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We have one more here, and this is on the panic alert devices. This is one really the Alyssa's Law piece from last session, and this is an area where I think we probably need a lot of help. So I move that the School Security Task Force uses funds from the General Grants Appropriation in HB 84 to supply physical panic alert devices to the state's public schools, and request that the State Board of Education and State Security Chief start the procurement process and review and standards process for these devices, including implementation and appropriate numbers for application, so that frankly we don't replicate the mistakes that Florida made. That make sense? Okay. Any questions about that motion? And just for clarity for everyone, when I referenced the mistakes that Florida made initially, they had too many contractors. Half of them couldn't do it, couldn't actually implement, they didn't work, and then you overwhelm the PSAPs. So if it doesn't actually work and the PSAPs can't handle it, right, you can't have a dozen options. So you've got to narrow that down and to actually make it function. So authorize the state security chief and the state board staff to go through that process. Any questions from staff or from members? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and place the motion on panic alert devices. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. And to the point of referencing the great state of Florida, we have a special presentation for the next item on the agenda on Florida's threat assessment and management system. Is it Tim that's going to join us today? He's going to join us. Okay. So Tim Hay is the executive director of the Office of Safe Schools in the Florida Department of Education, and he's joining us online. And I think we have him connected. Welcome, Tim. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Representative and members. Appreciate you guys been listening in, and thank you for your proactive approach to school safety. It's nice to see, it's nice to hear, and it's a joy to be with you all on this Friday and talk school safety. So like to be an open book. It sounds like you're already learning from some of our hurdles that we've had to get over the past couple of years. So whatever we can do to kind of help with other decisions as you look to those next things that you look to do in regards to school safety.
So I want to interrupt you, Tim. We can't tell you how much we appreciate our partnership with our friends from Florida and now Tennessee, Georgia, Texas. You guys have been by far the most willing to engage and help us to learn not just from your wins but from your mistakes, and that shows a different level of cooperation than I've seen between states in the past. It's been so refreshing, and just please pass that along to the rest of your team. How much we genuinely appreciate being able to work with you to get this right. So thank you.
No, yeah, and I appreciate that. And you mentioned Max and the family. So for you all, yeah, for you all to take these lessons learned from us and not have to have an event occur, because we wouldn't be where we are now without that taking place, but also the families most deeply affected taking action and continuing to take action. That's why we're where we are, and we've got ears to hear and leadership within our state that's made this the number one priority for our schools, is to make sure that our kids are safe. And we recognize that we're not perfect. We're learning every year. We're getting better. And I know when I came into my role a little over 4 years ago, I was kind of looking around with some of the team members, and we've grown quite a bit since then. And I would ask the question, "Hey, who's doing this already, or who's got this laid out?" And there wasn't anybody, which brings challenges associated with it, but hopefully no bad habits. So we were, hey, we got to create, and we got to continue to push. And so that's what we've done. And then, if there's any opportunity to share those lessons learned, it's our mission, and they're all our kids. When something happens in another state, they're all our kids, and we want to make sure we can do everything we can to support others that are on this journey.
Thank you. Go ahead. Your time's yours, Tim. Appreciate it.
Okay. So, I want to give you all the opportunity to ask questions too, as I'm kind of running through this. But one of the things that I came in to the office and recognized pretty early on, and you've talked about a number of things today that I think are extremely valuable. For me, the number one most important thing that we're focusing on now is really, really, really good threat management, threat assessment process. Mm-hmm. And so we're kind of in the middle of these phases. When we first started out, we had something that was a little bit more off the shelf. You can plug it in. We recognized that there were some shortcomings with some of those things that were around that. So then we decided to say, okay, we're going to create our own threat management model that's going to fit Florida's needs, that we're going to be able to recognize that there's changes that are going to be needing to be made, and have the flexibility and the ability to do those things. And so that's what we've done recently. And so it's been quite a journey of going through that process. And then currently where we are sitting today is we have a threat management process. It's been rolled out. We're getting a lot of great feedback from that, and we're able to really dive into the end user at the school level and understand what's working, what's not. Our biggest thing, and this is one of those things too, just to be clear, if you do this right, you're not just making schools safer, you're making communities safer as well. I mean, so the impact is one of those game-changing impacts that you can have when you can identify kids in need earlier from concerning behavior. And that's what we're really targeting. We're not, if a student's in front of a team for a threat, you've missed warning signs along the way to that moment. And that's what we're really trying to tackle with our model, is those concerning behaviors. How do we recognize? How do we then put things in place to help get that child off that pathway and support that child? So that's kind of where we are. And it's been a really well-received model. A lot of thought went into it. And then now this next phase that we're working on is the system, a statewide system of being able to manage what that looks like. And I think that's the biggest thing too, is as a student comes into a district or a school, how do we make sure that information to support the child is going to be followed? How does it make its way from school to school, district to district? And we're going to do that state to state. If there's a student that is being managed with a management plan, we want to make sure, even if they go out of state, if we know where they're going, that will follow up them so that there's clean handoffs and people understand what's needed and what needs to be put in place. So we're going to be rolling out a statewide system for that over the summer. Really excited about that. That'll give us a lot more data and perspective of what schools are doing it well, what districts are doing it well, and then who may need additional training as we support those training efforts. So that's where we're sitting with that. I don't know if you all have any questions specific to that process.
Okay. Anyone with any questions on the task force? Okay. Looks like Board Member Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Mr. Hay, this is Joe Carey. I sit on the State Board of Education here in Utah, and we're considering rules right now. The quote that I wrote down was identifying kids in need based on concerning behavior. And can you just, and maybe this isn't possible briefly, but as our board looks at rules around this exact topic, what kind of concerning behavior have you and your team identified? Is it across the board? Is it more broken down than that? But any insights that you think would be beneficial to us as we begin that conversation here would be welcome. Thank you.
No, absolutely. No, yeah, good question. And be happy to share the Florida model with you and some of the training material that goes along with it that'll identify more areas specific to this too. But you're looking anything that's deviating from that child's baseline behavior. And usually the teacher is going to be the one that's going to be most in tune to what that looks like for the student. So, I mean, if the student is shy and is somewhat likes to be by themselves, play by themselves, that's their baseline. But if a student is one that's really engaged, very vocal, these type of things, and then starts to isolate themselves in certain ways, that's going to be something that you're paying attention to.
So it's very specific to the child then. This isn't like a general standard. It's you identify the baseline for each child and then track deviations from that predictive behavior.
Yeah, and track would probably be too strong of a word. I mean, we're not going to be tracking every student in that way. It's being aware of these signs of a student that might be in need. You're checking that baseline. Another example would be if the student is truant or absent. They're not consistently on time, wearing the same clothes every day, hygiene. There's a number of factors that would be associated with that as well, and be happy to get a little bit more information for you specifically as you guys are starting to work on that, because we've got a state board rule that we've got in place that can probably give you some insight of some things that you can utilize as well.
Thank you, Tim. We'll reach out. Thank you, Chair.
I think that Board Member Carey and Tim, I think that's a very important conversation to have going forward, right? Because in so many of these cases, and I think Chief Pettington talked about it, but he talks about leakage all the time. There's almost always leakage with these kids, and when we're talking about children that engage in violent behavior, they give an indication. In the case of the tragic case of the Parkland shooting, that was all over the place, right? Any of us, any of those involved had followed through, we would have had a chance to stop that. And that was missed by law enforcement, it was missed by the schools, it was across the board. And that's really what we're after, is like when we have these known indicators of propensity to violence. In the domestic violence world, right, we're talking about threat assessments. And we do those now, right, to make sure that we're not missing something. We put that into code a few years ago, which is really not all that dissimilar of a concept. It's pretty similar model. Actually, we run through these things to make sure we're not missing something. And so when we identify a child that really does need help or has had one of these traumatic experiences in their life that has led to a noticeable change in behavior that clearly indicates more support's needed, we take care of it instead of letting it fester and grow. And then the other thing too, and I would like to hear from Chief Pennington on this, is the concept of case management. We don't do it well now. We certainly aren't where we need to be, I should say. Some jurisdictions probably do, but making sure that we aren't just passing off. And we talk about this with early warning system supports. What does a appropriate SIS look like on the educational side? But really, I'd love to hear from Chief Pennington or have the rest of the task force hear about what that case management should look like with this.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Tim, for your guys' information and willingness to present and share with Utah. So I think the case management piece it's multifaceted because you run into challenges with where law enforcement's purview begins and ends, and then where it goes back onto either education or parents for that matter. So Tim, I'd like to hear maybe how you guys are dealing with this, but specifically we have a real world example with the Georgia incident where law enforcement got involved. They go out and investigate. They essentially come to a conclusion based on the information they have on hand that no crime has been committed. And at that point, law enforcement's hands are really tied. You can't continue to intervene with people's rights or, Fourth Amendment type stuff. And so that information gets passed to the school district or maybe social work, wherever that would go. But law enforcement, for all intents and purposes, unless something else initiates an investigation for a crime, would be done. So I'm curious, Tim, if you guys are managing that through Department of Education at a school level, if possibly the social work group is involved where it's a non-criminal case or it hasn't elevated to a crime yet.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So my understanding too with the Georgia case is that the child at the time was being homeschooled. And so those are some areas too that you have to unpack and understand. So in Florida, we have school safety specialists that are plugged in at every district. And so what we see here, or what we're working towards too, because we're not perfect in that arena. We're getting better and understanding kind of some of the blind spots that we have and have to work through. Is okay. We have a homeschool student. Law enforcement responds. There's information that's there. How do we then make sure that that's not lost? And for me, it's going to be wherever the student currently is. So whatever district that student may be in, law enforcement, and something that I should mention too is on every school-based team, law enforcement has to be represented. So you have a certified law enforcement officer on every school-based team, and then we have a district threat management team as well that would be plugged in with law enforcement just to be able to input the information into the system to be able to say that this juvenile, he's homeschooled now, was identified for making a threat, captured the information. So that way, if the student does get registered in a district within the state, you at least have some information based on that you can do your due diligence as you receive the child. And so that's what we're working towards. That will be a part of that statewide system that I mentioned that will go live August this summer. So we're not there yet, but we're working towards that.
Thank you. I think the other challenge we have to consider, and I think this is probably a national challenge, is these silos of information, right? So when we talk about CJIS information or juvenile justice criminal information, that's all very, very protected. And then you get into FERPA or behavioral information, and that's all protected unless there's threats of violence. And then you get into HIPAA, where maybe they've been seen in the mental health side, and that's also protected unless there's threats of violence. But what we see in these investigations is the warning signs don't always include threats of violence. Sometimes they're ideology, sometimes they're artifacts or things they're wearing or things they're doing. And so have you guys been able to break any of those silos down to where you are sharing information across those platforms? I know that's a challenge we continue to have, at least here, I'm sure even nationally, that's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a challenge. We're working towards, shoring up and providing the information. There's still things associated with that aren't as easy as others. I think what we have now is one is um, we have a mental health coordinator that's assigned to every district as well. So mental health records. The idea is your threat management team should be that team that can bring those pieces of information together, right? So we have Department of Children and Families, Department of Juvenile Justice. We have different areas that's where it's on the state to say, all right, we're going to lead in this, and then we know that we need everybody at the table that has a role to play in this, because the schools have that role. They have the child for the day, for the majority of the day. Then we know that they go home, and Department of Children and Families have a role to play on what's happening at the home environment. So that's been the thing that we've been really getting better at, is having everybody at the table that's making a decision for the child's best interest, that and access to the information, so it's not siloed.
That's great. So just confirming though, they are allowed to share that information while they're sitting in that meeting.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point, is that they're able to access and have access to the information for that threat management team.
Great. So, Mr. Chair, the challenge would be here is, depending on where that's falling in this pathway to violence or this early warning system that we're dealing with, is who's managing it at what point, and then when does it move over? Obviously, if it's a criminal case or a threat of violence, that's pretty clear. Law enforcement could keep track of that. But once they get into the court system or they're adjudicated, again, law enforcement doesn't have the manpower to manage that caseload, and I'm not quite sure education does either. Maybe Dr. Voorhees or.
And I can speak to that too, just real quick too. So within the system, the data and the information is going to be the school district, right? We will be able to pull reports and have access to the basics of information, but the data and the information's responsibility falls to the district, and that they'll have to own the information and the data.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think the important part of this is I really appreciate you being here, Tim. Is that we're asking those questions, right? We're going to figure out what that interplay needs to be as we design this next iteration, and want to make sure that of course, we're protecting everyone's rights, but more importantly, we're not missing something. We're not missing something critical that we should have caught if we'd have been more on top of it. So, is there any other questions for Tim today? Okay, I think that concludes it. Tim, do you have anything else you'd like to leave us with?
No, just thank you. I mean, really, the stuff that you guys are doing it's great. Really excited we sharpen each other and we all get better from it. And there's some things that I saw you guys do 100% on your reports coming into you guys from the schools is very impressive. So it's exciting to see you guys and the work that you're doing. So I hope to have you guys come over to Florida and show us some things as well, and let us get better and steal some good ideas from you as well.
You might get more of us during the winter, so it's not a bad time to make that invitation.
It sounds good. Absolutely. Happy to help.
Thank you, Tim. Pass along our gratitude to your team, please.
Yes, sir.
Hey, we'll go ahead and move to our next item on the agenda. And this one is really one that has raised its head in the last 6 months, especially since October, as we've started to dig into this, and started with meeting with a conference I didn't know existed called SaintCon. Raise your hand if you've heard of SaintCon. Oh, good. Yeah, there you go. You should know that. Back in October, when I went to speak to them, it turns out that's where all of our IT folks from throughout our districts and school world also hang out. IT security conference in Provo. Fascinating. I'll tell you more about it later if you want. The folks that I met there, and it's kind of fun. Their badges were little computers that they had built and were building. They were all different from one another. Kind of funny throughout the day, but the real part of that conversation was rather sobering. The number of attacks that they're getting, they correlate with the stuff that we're seeing at the state. Only they don't have, in a lot of cases, near the protections that they need to in order to protect our kids' data. It's actually kind of reverse. The value of the data of our children is, at least on the illicit web, is quite a bit higher. It's 4 to 6 times higher than it is for yours or mine, when it comes to private information, because they're children. So I wanted to have a kind of just a real blunt conversation on cybersecurity right now, where we are. If we're talking about safety and security, certainly we need to address each of the aspects of that. And so we'll hear from first Kevin Lopez, who was here at UTS with us, now is with Fortinet, and Spencer Jenkins with UETN is also going to speak to us today. I'm going to turn some time here over to Kevin. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm Kevin Lopez. I brought my technical resource with me, Brant Davis.
That's right. Thank you, Brant. Yeah.
He keeps me straight and clear on the technology side. So.
Oh, I'm supposed to remind you both to speak directly into the microphone.
Okay.
For the people in the internet world. Thank you.
And I'm not sure if my screen's up.
Let's see.
On this side, the left side. Try that on. That's the other one. Okay. So yeah, thank you again for having us. We were honored to be able to be asked to provide some cybersecurity best practices. So first off, cybersecurity isn't just one thing. It's not one thing you can do. It's a mindset, and it must be considered in all digital environments. With many complex environments comes many threat attack vectors, and protecting those environments will require multiple approaches. There's not just one thing, like I mentioned. So with that said, there are minimum considerations that can be utilized when it comes to school safety regarding digital systems that could start to just build that initial roadmap and a good place to start. So as many know, there's been reports of, in the media about recent breaches. Cybersecurity best practice is top of mind, of course. One company providing services to our public schools, including in Utah, hackers gained access through a company's support portal with valid credentials. From these reports, access to all of their historical student and teacher data stored in those systems were obtained. It was called out in those reports that the main reason this data was accessed was the company did not secure their affected systems with basic protections such as multi-factor authentication. Other reports of breaches that have occurred even within Utah at local school districts would have required some other form of protection. As understood in those situations, an unauthorized actor gained access to certain computer systems and acquired files stored on those systems. This protection method would have been better served by having some type of endpoint detection response that is a proactive monitor that exists and sits on the laptops and devices being used by individuals 24/7. So when considering best practices, I like to think of 4 elements to consider. So you've got the individual users, and that includes their identity and their devices that they're using. In this case, we're talking about students, staff members, and parents. The next thing to consider is systems that are built and controlled by our schools, right? These are generally tools and systems that are managed by the school's IT teams. And then the third thing is we have a supply chain. These vendors are providing services to our schools with technologies in the cloud and SaaS type technologies. And so we need to trust those systems as well and secure them. And so with all of that, the fourth element really ends up being that network connection that's providing that pathway between that individual user and these applications, whether they're in the school systems or if they're on third party on the cloud. So for individual users, there's three best practices to consider. And a lot of us are familiar with identity management and multi-factor authentication. Very simple. Basically, we've seen where applications will ask us to send an SMS text, which is even becoming outdated at this point, where you type in a code, it validates you, you know it's your cell phone, so it's using another form to identify who you are. So that method, just adding that second factor or multi-factor, does significantly increase security and reducing risks by up to 99%. And this is from industry expert reports. And this can basically effectively block a vast majority of hacking attempts, even if a password is compromised. The next thing for individual users would be, like I mentioned, that their devices that they're using. So device protection is critical. Adding a tool on the device that can inspect, detect, and classify those events for potential threat vulnerabilities provides valuable insights all day, every day. So these tools can be provided with proactive protection. And then the third thing to consider is back to the network. Zero trust network access is a methodology that uses various types of, I guess, configurations, if you will, that basically takes the identity, matches it to the application across whatever that network connection is, whether it's remote at home, whether it's in the school, and it builds that secure tunnel. So that's the recommendations for individual users. Recommendations for those IT systems that are built by schools. Protecting these systems with basic tools like firewalls, right? That's table stakes mostly. Most of our school systems and organizations are doing that with these firewall devices. Not always are they using full stack services that are available that can provide network segmentation that provides limitations for access to certain areas, deep packet inspection, and cloud monitoring tools, right? They can give more analysis for IT teams to kind of identify where threats are. So that's a pretty basic recommendation. Additionally, role-based access tools that give privileged access. This actually defines who actually has access to those systems. It tracks what they do for changes, and you can identify with those records and historical methods, you can actually undo unwanted changes. Even if those credentials were accessed and compromised, you can see with that privileged access management tool what was done with that user's access. And then, of course, I mentioned from the identity side of things, the individual side of things, having a zero trust framework. The IT teams need to build those zero trust frameworks from the central databases and systems that are in those organizations. And that's where you start to network. I apologize if I'm getting too technical on terms and whatnot, so I'll try and keep it basic and explain. But network segmentation and zero trust, basically what it does is it says that this person can access only these limited applications. So they're only getting access to what they really need to use. So that it gives that framework to be able to decide and control that from the IT management teams. And then, of course, we see this all the time with government systems as well when you're talking cloud environments, following compliance guidelines like FedRAMP and so forth like that. NIST standards can also provide security frameworks in IT systems. So referencing those NIST guidelines is always a good best practice. I think also the last thing here for our school systems is always consider doing a risk assessment within your IT systems, penetration testing, those types of mitigation, just to kind of get an understanding of where you're at. So the third area is our supply chain. It's hard to put our trust with this data, and as I mentioned, those breaches can really put the student data out there at risk. And so there are some things that we can do to help mitigate that. We really have to hold vendors accountable. I'm on the vendor side, right? I want to be held accountable as well, but some things can be done within contracts, and I've seen it where you can say, like, within our contract, we need you to be SOC 2 compliance and follow these NIST policies. Once you are giving them that guidance or putting that into a contract, they are then required to follow those tools like multi-factor authentication, role-based access standards, like I mentioned before, with that we can do just even in just our school systems. So that's one step that can be done there with the supply chain. I mentioned the second one as part of that first one, but the third is again managing that controlled network access. Building the secure pathways between your users and the school's users, students, teachers, back into those third-party environments. As long as that data is encrypted and controlled and identified, you can map it and identify what's going back and forth. There were some schools that were protected because they did have some controls in some of these breaches that have been out there in the media. And then again, back to very similar recommendations: require or ask vendors to consider providing any risk assessment reports that they've done, right? So holding them accountable in various ways. So just some overall safety considerations. Explore that there are tools that are out there where if data's been compromised and it's been sold, and then ransomware has been asked for and paid for, and then it's like, oh yes, we've deleted it. There are tools out there that can give organizations insights to seeing what that risk exposure is across the public internet and dark web data. So you can actually do recognizance in a way to find out, like, is my data being utilized or sold or whatever. So there are tools that are out there. So that's kind of like the roadmap that I was talking about before. You build that foundation and then you start to explore different tools. This one ties back into the physical security that was being talked about prior to our time. Network-based cameras to monitor physical safety of students. Being connected to the network, that data can also be protected and controlled. And then, of course, some other things: ensuring that there's sufficient bandwidth to support various systems and controls. That's always good to consider. Avoid deploying multiple point solutions that can make controls more complex. Sometimes, having a single platform to do multiple things can be a little bit easier to manage and create those controls. And then the last thing, just overall, with the shortage of IT skill sets, there are some things to consider. Lots more with artificial intelligence. We're seeing automation happen. A lot of integrations within if you are using multiple platforms or tools, you can integrate between, so you're able to talk between those IT technologies. This can definitely assist us all with doing more with less. And I think it's always smart to consider training. There are programs that are out there that are available to the industry, especially K-12 school industry, for free training. So training is always going to be key to train up staff, train up students, train up teachers, right? Whether it's the IT staff, students, or the teachers. So that's really all I have. Of course, I brought a whole slide deck of everything that our company does provide, but really I only bring this slide up to say that there are so many different ways to protect our data. You have to kind of start with those basic minimums and create a roadmap for yourself, whatever that may be. And we can kind of help and drive those discussions around doing it for our public schools in Utah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the task force? We haven't really talked a lot about cyber in this, but that is something we're going to focus on a lot this year. We expect to have some basic standards, like we have for physical security, established and understand what they are, and then go from there. But is that Joe? Okay. Board Member Carey, let's see if we can get that to work. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that presentation. Very illuminating. one statistic that you mentioned here was that MFA, the multi-factor authentication, can reduce hacking attempts. I think it was like 99.9%.
Yeah.
So my question is, in your opinion, in your experience, why aren't more of our schools, entities, organizations moving faster in that direction? Is it cost or is it convenience? Like what's stopping us from going 99%? That's pretty impressive.
Right. I see both. I see cost can definitely be a factor, trying to find ways to do it, because you end up, depending on how many people you have within your organization or who you're trying to protect, it's a licensing thing based off of number of people. But some people, and I've seen this in some of our customer conversations in the government space, where it's an inconvenience thing. I've got to get to my data fast, or I'm in a critical situation. I can't sit and wait for another authentication thing. I need to be quick with it. It's like, I get that. And so maybe it's still in development for like how there are tools out there that can provide certificates. So if you have a USB connected into a specific laptop, but then then that acts as a multi-factor, but then that can be compromised. Right?
Yes.
So there's definitely risk there. So there's the understanding of it. It's a very simple thing to implement it. There is cost to it, but it's a convenience thing as well. So I see both. So
thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And he did a good job of not mentioning like the specific compromising situations that we've seen. Right, the districts. I appreciate that you were careful with that.
Yeah.
But those are active and happening here in Utah. Like last week, 170,000 records that I'm aware of, right, of our kids were compromised, which is not insignificant. Like it's a huge number.
My daughter included.
Yeah, mine too, by the way. Right.
Yeah.
So when we're having these conversations, and and even more bizarrely, and these have been talked about publicly, so I'll mention the Power Schools thing, but listening to some experts talk about it this week, just on a podcast, you're talking about kind of something that Kevin referenced, right? Kind of the silliness of trusting a foreign enemy, a foreign bad actor, somebody who's willing to steal children's information, that we're going to pay them off, and then just on the trust me, bro, that they're going to delete it, as if we should be able to ever, paying off these guys doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't guarantee. And if they just got paid $3 million because they did this, you think honestly they're going to take something that they now know is worth $3 million to us and not use it again, or sell it to another bad actor? Now, this is absurd, right? So yes, inconvenience that happens, right? That case, right? You talked about it. They compromise like one person's access. That's it, and open the door to everything. So we have to do a better job of intentionally structuring what our cybersecurity is going to look like here, and what those basic minimum standards need to be, and making sure that we're not, for convenience or lack of planning or resources, putting ourselves in a situation where this is a virtual certainty that we're compromising. Anyway, thank you for being here. I don't see any other questions for you, so go ahead and move to Spencer, get him up.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you being here on short notice. And Spencer, it's his fault that I ended up at St. Con. And for the record, I was the only person in a full suit at that thing. I think he had a jacket on.
Yeah, I was definitely dressed up. The dress code there. If I can get this plugged in. And Representative, thank you for taking that time to come to that conference.
No, it was good.
That question and answer you offered was great. Y'all see that okay?
Just so everybody knows, I did get scolded, not by him, but many times, for not including cybersecurity as a front on the front end of school security. They were not happy with me for that.
Well, and maybe on that note, it's a great segue. We appreciate your interest in cybersecurity. This is as you might well know, given what we do, this is a big topic for UETN. This is probably a daily conversation within our office of what's going on across the education enterprise. I just thought it'd take just a minute or two to give us a little bit of background. The Utah Education and Telehealth Network is essentially what grew out of ARPANET way back in the 60s with the University of Utah and the fourth node of the internet. We essentially maintain that node out to the internet, but it's now in combination with some other functions that we do. We now run this network of 2,200 plus connections across the state for education and some telehealth sites on a much smaller scale. But today we'll talk about education. The funding model for this is a partnership between this is the legislature essentially that has set this up for the past 30 years. There's a little bit of a state appropriation that leverages federal dollars that then helps to fund the internet to all K-12 and higher education in the state, including charters, public and private. It's an incredible model, and it's almost, I would say, the Cadillac of public networks across the country. And it's all due to the legislature's vision and work in maintaining this. So just general appreciation to the legislature for its vision on this. So with that backdrop, the role we play in security, I thought we'd try to give a little bit of background on where we sit in this security realm. So I think the best analogy is kind of from a utility standpoint. If you take a water company cares about the water as soon as it hits the household. From there, it's up to the homeowner to figure out what to do with that water to keep it clean and what they do with it. We kind of function in a similar fashion, but we do it in a partnership or by agreement with broadband providers. So we own very little of the fiber we maintain. It's actually over 90% of it is done through the broadband providers of the state. We competitively bid all of these locations, and we go with the best product for the needs of those schools, and we provide that connection. Once that traffic goes onto the network of the high school or the district, we're very clear that that's the responsibility of the districts. That's not to say that we don't offer support and assistance in their efforts. It's very much a mutual effort because our traffic obviously is their traffic, and we have our security policies and practices by obligation, of course, to the telcos we contract with, but also just general best practices. And what Kevin mentioned, he touched on a lot of those. We have policies that make sure we adhere to those standards like NIST and other national standards. Our cybersecurity team works closely with the Utah Cyber Commission. We're actually a member of that commission. We're part of the same conversations they are when it comes to the threat management and mitigation of threats, at least as it comes into education. I think the best way to describe where we sit in this cybersecurity realm is about a year ago, there was an esports event in one of our districts that they were hosting. And towards the tail end of the event, our folks or our systems noticed some anomalous activity to the network, on our network to the connection of that high school. As we looked into it, we made a call to their technical leads, and they hadn't seen anything, but we'd seen this traffic. As they looked into it, what we discovered is a disgruntled contestant, if you will, or competitor in this tournament was not happy with the outcome and had called down a distributed denial of service attack, or a DDoS. What that is he called basically hundreds of servers from across the globe to come attack this network connection to this high school. So as we touched base with the district there, we were able to cut that off with an alternate route and mitigate that. One of the challenges there is we see things on our side, the district sees things on their side. We don't always see what each other sees. The kinds of services that Kevin touched on, what we call managed services, helps us see each other's network traffic a little better. So imagining if we had a little bit more of enhanced advanced security at some of these districts, a service like Kevin described would have been able to catch that call, if you will, out to these various servers across the globe to come attack that network connection. We would have been able to prevent it more quickly. Similarly, if there was an access hack through a password stolen or something, a lot of that can be mitigated through these services that Kevin has described. UETN is in the process, just literally we're in the next week or so, we're expecting to have some information. We've contracted some assistance to understand the security landscape of all of education. This has been about an 8-month effort, both public and higher education and some charters. What we hope is this will give us a more exhaustive window into the security posture of the enterprise. We do know several districts do have managed services. They have actually very good security, but the deployment of those, the implementation of those vary. And so when it comes to policies by which we can see and standardize and streamline what threats we're managing, it can get to be a lot of work at the state level. What we would hope to do in this conversation around cybersecurity is to consider, similar to what we see now on the state government side. DTS has this under a Homeland Security grant. They're deploying a tool like Kevin's to local governments, and all that feeds up into the state where they can see the same kinds of information. They certainly don't take on the liability or the response, but it becomes more of a shared sandbox, if you will, to manage security threats and instances. Something like that in education could occur if we had the resources. We made a funding request a couple of sessions ago for something along these lines. We're waiting on a potential federal funding opportunity for the same thing. I only mention that because that's where maybe we can be helpful as you consider the question around security. We would be a willing partner. We have close relationships with our districts. Whenever they do have compromises, we're one of the first people they call because they want to see what we're seeing on the network. Sometimes we'll see it before they do. Sometimes we don't catch it. But we are a close partner to our education partners. As you noticed at that conference, our security team holds a biweekly sort of check-in of current threats and practices to keep people apprised. But even in those efforts, as you might imagine, districts are all very different and resourced differently. And because of that, there are gaps that exist. So I'll stop there, Representative and chairs, if there's any questions, but that's kind of our overarching big picture. Hopefully
Thank
that
you.
helps.
We appreciate you being a part of this conversation. I was recently learned about your funding request that just kind of got ignored a few years ago. And whoops. As I had the conversation yesterday with one of our local school district directors that was in charge of this stuff, he's just as concerned about that as he is about anything with physical security, or even more so. And I think it's important for the task force, just for those of us here, to not just understand what these risks are, but the long-term potential impacts on our kids and those that we serve, and just understand that we're going to need to put a spotlight on this aspect of it as well as we consider these other things. In many ways, they overlap. You talk about location data, and somebody now knows where a given child is going to be at any given point. There's no divorcing of that information from the school from a security standpoint. So I appreciate it being here. We are hoping to have more detailed conversations with you. We wanted to have this part of our conversation leading into the session so that we could help kick that off. Do you have anything else?
I'm sorry I omitted this earlier. Just by way of information, the legislative auditor is just commencing an audit in this very area. Just this morning we met with them. And they're asking a lot of these same questions, and hopefully that'll help. Between that and the assessment, hopefully it'll inform what some steps could be.
Well, my co-chair, Senator Milner, is the one that asked for that audit 2 months ago, so she's excited to hear that you started that this morning. So thank you. Thank you, Senator Milner. Okay, I don't see any of the questions from the committee, so I'll go ahead and move to, do I have one? No, okay. Go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda, and that is our Safe UT team. A lot of exciting stuff here. We appreciate Rachel coming back, original member of the task force, and now our special advisor on Safe UT. Thanks for being here, especially in person. We usually only get to see you on the TV.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege and an honor, and always a good excuse to get out of the house. So thank you very much. Hello to the task force. Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Lusinski. I'm the Director of Community Crisis Services with Huntsman Mental Health Institute. So we run and operate many of the 24/7 crisis intervention and suicide prevention programs, which include Safe UT.
I need to make sure you're talking more directly into that microphone. Just bring it closer.
How's
There you
that?
go.
Okay. So hopefully folks are aware and have SafeUT downloaded on their phone, but a brief overview in case there's folks online that aren't aware. SafeUT is Utah's really innovative approach to mental health and school safety technology here in our state. So it was born out of legislation back in 2015 and has continued to grow and expand in awareness and utilization, and really is an incredible behavioral health first approach and system of care and collaborative partnership with so many incredible agencies across the state, including the Attorney General's office, the Utah State Board of Education, the Utah System of Higher Education, mental health, law enforcement, members of the public. So really just incredible collaboration that helps address a critical crisis in our state, which is that suicide is the leading cause of death for youth and young adults in Utah, ages 10 to 24. And we also recognize that based on many of the studies and statistics, that behavioral health concerns can result not just in a harm to oneself and attempts of suicide, but also harm to others. And so there's really key factors within the SafeUT app that help keep schools safe and keep our community safe. So that includes the chat feature where any user with the app is able to download and establish a profile, whether they're a student, a parent and guardian, or an educator within the public school system, and then indicate what school they're associated and affiliated with. And they're able to confidentially start a chat real time with our master's level licensed mental health counselors that are staffed at Huntsman Mental Health Institute. So 24/7, someone can reach a licensed therapist and receive that crisis intervention or support if they're dealing with a crisis, suicidal thoughts, or maybe thinking about hurting others, or hearing concerns, whether that's on social media or overheard in the hallways. We also have a tip feature. And so that's where people are able to confidentially report tips that are triaged by our counselors, and more information is gathered in that back and forth conversation. And then there's appropriate reporting and protocols that are established where our counselors may directly contact law enforcement and schools if there's an emergency situation, or just pass on some non-imminent tips that schools are aware of. So quick overview in last year of fiscal year 24, just so that folks are aware of some of the impact and outcomes of SafeUT. Last year, we had 26,808 chats that were started, and that had over 1 million back and forth messages that were sent with users and our counselors. So people are definitely using the service. Of course, we know that there's still additional bandwidth, and we hope that more people continue to download and use SafeUT. The one that really pertains to this task force, though, is the tip functionality. We saw 8,985 tips that were submitted. And for the first time in SafeUT's history last year, bullying was the #1 tip that came through over suicide. So we are seeing that there's more potential grievances that could be established in schools. And it's definitely well indicated in many studies that grievances or retaliating against bullying can lead to potential school threats or acts of violence. And so this is definitely a concern and something that we're watching closely in Utah, and very grateful for the task force and the legislature continuing to invest in SafeUT and helping to bolster the school safety functionality that we have. We did see within our tips as well that explicitly 758 of those pertained to a potential school threat or act of violence. So that is definitely a concern, and something we're very fortunate, partly because of SafeUT, but certainly many other efforts across the state, that we have not seen any mass casualty events in Utah schools, and we hope to continue that positive trend with many of these enhancements coming out of House Bill 84. So I'm hoping that that helps establish some context and lay the groundwork for our report out today. I did also want to provide some additional context following up from Tim's presentation earlier, where we have seen from studies published by the U.S. Secret Service around school safety that 93% of school violence perpetrators did exhibit concerning behavior before they engaged in acts of violence. So those can be things like you mentioned, deviation from baseline behavior. It can also be glorifying or talking about previous school shooters, talking about weapons, posting pictures of weapons online, making threats explicit or vague about acting out on grievances, or warning people don't come to school tomorrow. You won't want to be there. So those are some of the key behaviors that we see in national studies and unfortunately that are submitted through SafeUT that we're able to act and intervene on. We also know that per that Secret Service study that 94% of perpetrators of violence explicitly communicated their intentions to others. So those could either be express statements, messages that are posted online, things that are shared through social media. So like Representative Wilcox mentioned, that leakage is really very prevalent in acts of violence. And we're very fortunate in Utah that we have a centralized tool where any member of the community can help contribute to keeping schools safe and make SafeUT, our counselors, and therefore school and law enforcement officials aware of potential threats. So as we really look at House Bill 84, there are a few key requirements that were outlined for SafeUT explicitly. The first requirement was to have a level of mandatory reporting to SIAC, so the Statewide Information Assessment Center. And any time that there is a threat to life or a threat to others that is reported through SafeUT, per House Bill 84, we'll now be required to send that information to SIAC and make sure that that's captured in the statewide database and available for local law enforcement to respond to. So that feature, we have been working for many months on the expansion and development of enhanced school safety functionality. That feature did go live on December 6th. And in the month of December alone, so from December 6th to December 31st, we had 34 tips that were submitted to SIAC that did reach the level of threat to life or threat of harm to others. Some context there is we see lower utilization in the month of December because of the holidays and winter break. So pretty eye-opening to see the level of risk and acuity that's out there in our state. And fortunately, we have SafeUT as a tool where people can report these concerns and we can coordinate appropriately. I'll get ready here. To share my screen and just let everyone know what our plans and additional enhancements are that are in the works with House Bill 84 requirements.
This is probably the most important part, guys.
Yeah.
Just FYI. You're going to want to hear this.
Okay. We'll see. Any luck? I appreciate the dramatic buildup, at least. There we go. Okay. So our data push to SIAC, like I mentioned, is live. And we have a three-phased expansion plan for new features that are being built into the SafeUT app that will really help accomplish these school safety efforts and all of the incredible work that's being done by this task force.
Can you zoom in so that those of us that have really old eyes can see? There you go. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. So within phase one, like I mentioned, our data push to SIAC is live. That partnership and coordination is going extremely well at this point. We also are looking at, with SafeUT being almost coming up on 10 years old, really reimagining its purpose and making new enhancements that will allow for more safety functionality. So currently with the app, when you sign up and download it, you're able to select one profile. In order to really accomplish the appropriate levels of communication and coordination, we've recognized that multiple profiles need to be available for our users of the service. So this is currently developed and testing for release, which will be coming out in the next few weeks. But we will be able to have users select multiple profiles. So for example, someone would be able to be both a teacher and a parent within the SafeUT app. It will also allow users to associate with multiple schools. So for example, someone may be a teacher at a high school, a parent of someone in a middle school, and if they're busy and multitasking, they might also be a graduate student at a university. So we'll be able to have users associate with multiple profiles and receive appropriate communication that will be coming from those schools. We're also working on enhanced notification abilities. So this will allow our users to receive notifications from all of their chosen profiles and associated schools, as well as allowing schools to send targeted messages out to users. So a use case example would be if a high school said, we want to notify all of the teachers and parents that we have a snow day coming up, or that we have potentially a school safety drill coming up. They would be able to send out a message to specific users associated with their school that have the SafeUT app. We will also have specific templates that are created in accordance with new threat assessment and school safety protocols, and in partnership with our new school security or state security chief Pennington, really making sure that we have some standardized language and templates that schools can fill out that information and send to users, so that there's consistent language and standards in how we're communicating and responding to potential threats. We also are developing a notification center. So many apps have this functionality. Again, the original purpose of SafeUT is evolving as the school safety threats and response to those are continuing to expand. So this will create an inbox within the app where users are able to receive those notifications from schools and from SafeUT counselors as appropriate, and then access those previous messages as well. So phase one is really working to enhance the flexibility and baseline functionality by enabling improved communication methods for schools, and eventually for our law enforcement partners as well. Phase two that we're currently researching and working on technical scoping and requirements gathering is looking at location-based notifications. So anytime that a user downloads SafeUT, it will give them the option to select if they would like to turn on location services, just like any app. So users are able to select always have their location services on, only turn those on while they're using the app, or ask the app to never track. We will also be working on education and marketing materials to really encourage everyone to please turn on your location services when you're using SafeUT. This is not something that we're looking at and monitoring 24/7, but if we have an emergency situation, being able to view someone's location can really help potentially save lives in coordination with our law enforcement partners. We're also exploring location-based notifications. So as an example, if there was a threat at a high school, we would be able to really draw a virtual perimeter around that area. And for any individual that has SafeUT on their phone and has location services turned on, even if they're not associated with that school, if they're in that geofence, they may be able to receive targeted messaging saying there's an active safety threat and we want you to be aware of this. And law enforcement could also provide some directions on how to respond, or maybe reunification points if those are needed. To go along with that, we'll also be looking at developing a way where we can have credentialed logins for both educators and law enforcement partners. So that ties in really well with the presentation we saw before here on cybersecurity practices, where you have those role-based settings. And that is something that we're working to further expand and enhance within SafeUT. So we'll be looking at ways to coordinate with our local law enforcement agencies and our local education agencies to have approved role-based users that are credentialed and able to log in to the backend portal on SafeUT and send those outbound messages in the case of critical safety or emergency events that can be shared through SafeUT. So again, these features are foundational for our phase 3 development, which will include developing an emergency protocol feature. So this is one where we hope to develop it and have great functionality and also never need to use it. So that's our hope and our aspiration, but it would be able to send out an emergency alert to anyone with SafeUT on their phone if there is an active threat, a potential threat of violence or active violence situation. There would be emergency alert messages that are sent out really looking at attention grabbing notifications or push notifications for users with SafeUT on their phone. And with credentialed law enforcement users that can log in on to the back end of a SafeUT portal, they would be able to send out verified information on how to respond to this threat and follow instructions in order to keep folks safe in the event of an emergency. So again, that law enforcement dashboard would not allow, just to be very clear, it would not allow anyone from law enforcement to see those mental health chats or any of the standard tips that are submitted. It would just give them the ability to send outbound notifications in the event of a life-threatening emergency to specific impacted users with SafeUT installed on their phone. So these features are again in development. We're hoping to have these developed and ready to go live in this next school year. So seeing around in August or September of 2025 completion date for these 3 phases. And it's definitely really critical to have these developed so that we can continue to keep schools safe. And also really hope that along the way we can encourage people to continue downloading and using SafeUT so that they can receive these life-saving notifications in the event of an emergency. That's everything I have for my presentation today, but I'm happy to answer any questions or clarify any details as needed.
Thank you. I'm hoping everybody's watching this, but it was probably even outside of the room. Is more important. We had some issues obviously last year that kind of highlighted the need for this. When we had a number of our contractor partners that were we got really aggressive, I'll just say, with some of our districts. Thank you, Doug. Got really aggressive with some of our districts and what they were kind of pushing, and frankly, that probably wasn't a wise use of our funds. Let's put it that way, existing and otherwise, and let alone anything with the grant programs. To the point where Superintendent Dixon at the time and Commissioner Anderson and I sent out letters to the districts asking to please don't contract beyond 24-25 with any of these kind of products. Frankly, with SafeUT, we own it. It's ours. This is our team that's developing, and we've already invested over a decade into this product that we've proven and worked out the kinks. So we need to do a better job of communicating, I think. There's still opportunities for teachers, especially in those in the schools, to understand the value of it. I've watched it play out in real time multiple times now in actual emergencies where it has saved lives and and dealt with other issues. And I want to make sure that everybody understands we were actively working on the back end. Please be careful about that. Have a conversation with us about what the capability is, what we can do, what we are looking to do before you sign anything long-term. And meanwhile, we'll do our best to support you on the back end, and the team is active. The engineers are incredibly committed, and I couldn't be happier with how they have responded to this. So thank you for being here. This is going to be a long-term part of the solution, I think, and we're had active conversations with folks from around the country who are either trying to replicate or want to use it outright. So I think there's going to be some opportunities for us there too to spread this beyond Utah. I kind of feel bad that Representative Ellison is not here for this moment as we have this conversation with his team, because he's been so committed to it and integral in making it happen over the years. So, but he knows we appreciate it. So that's why he's here. Are there any questions about what the potential is or about the direction we're headed? We did give him a short timeline on a lot of this, much shorter than they originally asked for. Our goal is to get a lot of these, as much as we can, implemented for this summer so that for next school year, it's ready to go when the kids head back to school. So any brilliant ideas, things you think of, anybody in the audience has a brilliant idea, something we should include or consider. Again, this is open, like give us your best. We want to see, we want to do everything we need to. Okay, I think it is not the last item on the agenda. I just, I'm hungry. It's meant we scheduled this over lunch, and the people we scheduled it over lunch for aren't here anymore. So we'll just mention that. HB 40 is this year's bill for those of you that are following along. We have a lower bill number this year, which is kind of fun. And it's a round one. We don't have to, it's just 40. We got it. Jeff, our attorney, we've had him furiously working, and he's excited to give us a little bit of a summary of where we are and some of the changes going into the session. Of course, we'll talk about those in the law enforcement committee and then with our education partners as we move into the session this year. Jeff, go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much. Jeff Van Holten. I am, as Representative Wilcox mentioned, the Associate General Counsel assigned to this committee, representing the legislature. And it's not lost on me that it is me that stands between food, so I will be very quick. Just as a reminder, the original draft that is currently public has three main categories. It's in the draft. That's personnel, people doing things. We're making some changes on who's doing what. There's building standard stuff in the bill as well, kind of updating and clarifying some of the things that we expect the grants to be used toward, some specific standards there. And then there's the miscellaneous bucket for all of the other things. So here is your teaser, the preview for the substitute, first substitute that's coming out. We received some feedback around the personnel amendments that we made and who we assigned what to, and some suggestions about kind of reconfiguring that. So you'll be seeing that in the first substitute, kind of making sure that there's everyone who has been asked to be on first, second, or third, like being on first, second, and third, and work well together. So we've got some new language coming out for that. We've got a couple of things around building standards, not a whole lot new. So if you're expecting something really big and shiny, that's not already there. That's not really going to happen in this sub. But we have some updates on the building standards, but nothing too dramatic from what you've already seen in the current public version of the bill. And then our miscellaneous bucket got a little bit bigger. We've had some interesting presentations back in December as well as today, cybersecurity, AEDs, things like that. So you'll see some language reflected in the bill around those items as well as some conversation around higher education and safety on campuses as well. So all that to come. A draft will be out next week when we gavel in and begin the party. So look forward to being with you on the Hill.
Thank you, Jeff. And yes, that is like we've talked about a minute ago. This is not scripture. It is subject to change. We are going to update it as we go and get more information and learn along the way. Are there any questions for Jeff based on what we just heard? Okay. Yeah, we are going to put some basic requirements then, as you've heard on cyber. We're still working out exactly what that needs to be. So we heard from our partners today and DTS, and we'll have those conversations. But we're excited. We're about here. We went up to the last minute. We are the only hearing, like official one, as far as I know of today. So thanks for being here. There's another one. Dang it. We were the only one a minute ago. All right. Well, thanks for being here anyway. Okay. Are there any other items for the task force to discuss today? If there are, as you have those conversations, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll take one final motion. I was waiting for somebody's got to say. Let's see. It was very slow, very slow. All right. Okay. Motion to adjourn. That's in order. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.